you, Brett, wanted to start this week by talking about why everything is labeled in the inverse.
Yes, and I should say, we didn't mention at the top, there are a couple of podcasts that I did in Bath that are out now, and actually they fit perfectly this topic. So Robert Malone sat with me. You can find that one on Spotify.
That's not on YouTube because YouTube can't handle the truth.
YouTube cannot handle the truth, and their community guidelines folks believe you can't handle the truth. Garrett Vandenbosch, that one is out as of 2 days ago. That one is out on YouTube and Spotify, I believe.
That one is already out?
It is already out, okay. Yes. Both of these are...
And of course, Neil Oliver was the first one that you did in England. And there's 2 more coming, right?
There's 2 more coming. And then there was another one that I recorded this week on a slightly different topic. But in any case, all of these are cases in which we are wrestling with the question of what the truth is and what it isn't. And many of us have noticed that the labels on these things seem to be flipped at an incredible rate in modern times. It's not like most of what is discussed by official sources is right, and then every so often there's something over which we disagree, and some thing that has been labeled wrong turns out to be right. If you look at topics like the COVID pandemic and the public health reaction to it, you will find the labels are just simply reversed, right? Yep. And that is a conspicuous pattern, because if we were just simply confused, you wouldn't expect the labels to reverse. You would expect it to be noisy and contentious, and you'd get a hodgepodge.
So examples of labels here that you're thinking of?
Well, let's just say if you were trying to navigate what to do for your family in light of COVID, right? Let's say, like us, you believe COVID to be a dangerous and destructive pathogen, and you're concerned about preventing it, and you're concerned about preventing transmission, and you're concerned about reducing the hazard that the pathogen poses to you and your family. Well, the question is, if you go to the CDC or the FDA or the WHO or any of the official sources, if you go to the New York Times, the Washington Post, you'll find the answer is very clear, that these vaccines, which is the wrong term, and increasingly people have begun to understand why this is a matter of significance. You might say that they are transfective agents. They are certainly inoculations, but vaccine is not a good definition for them. But nonetheless,
it's not the word that should be applied to them. But absent that word being applied to them, it would have been much harder to get so many people on board.
Right. That's just the thing. So labeling them as vaccines is a case in which you've got the standard outlets all describing these things in terms that are inaccurate. The value of these things was inaccurately described from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Their efficacy, if we're talking about in the trial phase, or their effectiveness once they are released at preventing you from contracting the disease, preventing you from transmitting the disease, is actually extremely low. But we are told that we must take them in order to prevent the spread of this dangerous disease. That's misinformation masquerading as information. Mm-hmm. Whereas we are told that repurposed drugs, I won't mention the names so we can leave them here on YouTube, but you are free to infer that I am talking about the same compounds that we have been arguing about for many, many months.
Voldapaste.
Voldapaste. I think you should get the human version, but nonetheless, there are multiple repurposed drugs that clearly have high efficacy. Not only have they been successfully incorporated by the doctors who have been most effective at treating patients with COVID, they've been deployed successfully around the world, are clearly implicated in the crash of waves of COVID that took place in places like Uttar Pradesh.
Mm-hmm. This is a good crash we're talking about.
Right. So in any case, what you've got is actually effective pharmaceuticals that we are told are snake oil. And we have something that isn't a vaccine, which we are told is a vaccine, that doesn't do the 2 most important things that it would need to do in order to control the pandemic and to explain why they would be mandated, which is to prevent you from contracting the disease and prevent you from passing it on. In other words, what you've got is the exact inverse of a recipe for protecting yourself, mm-hmm. right? You could have done the right thing for your family if only you had known that you should tune out the New York Times, the Washington Post, the CDC, the FDA, the WHO, all the major universities, right? And so this is a problem because for most of us, we are not equipped to look at the entire range of institutions and say they've all got it wrong. I mean, even my voicing that sounds perfectly insane. What are the chances that all the institutions got it wrong? Mm-hmm. And if they did all get it wrong, my point is we have to now go backwards and say, well, what could possibly explain that? Yeah.
One of the issues, and I don't think I'm going to step on any of the toes that you were about to put into the argument. That didn't work at all today. Is that when it's all the institutions, it raises the question of how is that possible? It could be all of them. And most people will look at that and say, well, it's just so obvious. It's just so obvious that they have all come to that. And back of their mind, whether or not they are conscious of this, whether or not people are actually statistically sophisticated enough to recognize that what they are imagining is everyone came to this idea independently, right? Whereas if it's really all the institutions, there's now a reasonable chance that actually that's a bunch of non-independent data points. And we know that, the media aren't doing original science, that they have to accept the authority from someone largely. Even so-called science journalists largely are not doing as much of the sort of assessment of the science that they're reporting on as they should be. But at the point that there is uniformity of agreement across all of the domains, then you really do have to wonder about whether or not the independence of the data points, and therefore the independence of the press and academia and everything, is in fact present where it needs to be.
Right. And, it should also be obvious to people as they look at the supposed consensus in front of them that those who have departed from the consensus have had terrible things happen to them, right? All of us who have departed from the consensus who are professionally trained in any regard have been dismissed as cranks and kooks and worse. We've been called grifters and all sorts of things. And so the point is, look, there is an incentive to stick with the conventional narrative. And then the consensus is trotted out as evidence that the pattern is very clear. And anybody who, knows how to do the analysis will reach the same conclusion that the CDC and the FDA and the WHO and the New York Times and everybody else has reached, right? But the point is, when you see an intense campaign that punishes people for stepping out of line, then you have to ask the question, how durable, how meaningful? Is that a Potemkin consensus, right? Is that a paper-thin consensus born of the fact that all of those who are capable of seeing the problem with it are afraid to say what they can see?